What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, we got to talk about Sidney in Scream 6. A very interesting article was written from HelloSydney.com, and they did an excellent job. Somehow, they got the inner scoop to read the first draft of the script of Scream 6. Now, I do want to preface things by saying, look, first draft, you got some crazy ideas. You got some crazy things going on. And sometimes you might change it up, between the first draft and the final, or at least, God, I hope so. And ultimately, this has become a discussion, I think, online in the Scream community of like, hey, Neve Campbell didn't want to come back for the money, but did she dodge a bullet in terms of the script? So I want to go over some of the highlights because there was also, I think, a little miscommunication. There were a lot of reports going around at the time of Scream 6 that Sidney would have just been kind of a glorified cameo or just a cameo in general, and that's not true, at least according to the first draft. It could have changed, it could have even altered before the pay dispute, but originally it did not seem like Sidney was going to be just a cameo. That doesn't mean it was fantastic, it just means she wasn't going to be a cameo. She would just appear kind of throughout the movie. So let's talk about it, let's read the article, and then we'll go over some opinions on it after. Okay, so first it says her first appearance would have happened after Dr. Stone's murder, who in this version would have been watching Stab 2. It then would have cut to Sidney dropping off her three daughters, 10, 8, and 4, so there's some ages, by the way, off at school. The oldest is named Hannah. Sid learns about Ghostface in New York from a school mom and rushes home to pack. Then Mark Kincaid, now a sheriff, confronts her, and he says, you spent the last 25 years running away from this stuff, and now you want to run towards it, to which Sidney replies, I need to make sure it doesn't end up on our doorstep, because sooner or later, it always does. Mark warns you, keep running after this, someday you're not going to come back. So then Sidney would arrive in New York after Annika's death and accompanies the gang to the shrine. In this version, it's a storage warehouse discovered by Kirby, not by Gale. In an amusing bit, Sidney and Gale are equally baffled by Kirby's FBI status. Billy Loomis's mask is on display there, luring Sam towards it. This time it's Sidney, not Tara, who asks what she is doing. In addition, the family conversation between Sam and Gale was initially a conversation between Sam and Sidney, with a focus on Sam's abandonment issues. The story then follows them to the Central Park location, and the change here is this time Sam and Sidney steal Bailey's cop car to try and save Gale. As Sam and Sid would never make it in time, Sam contemplates calling Danny in this version of the story. Sam and Danny are flirtatious neighbors, but they don't have an established relationship prior to the events of the story. Sidney asks, or can he finish her off? Is it possible he's the killer? Sam ends her call to Danny mid-dial, but Danny somehow shows up to save Gale anyway from a final fatal stab in her apartment. They take Gale to the ambulance. When asked by a paramedic if she is family, Sid reflects on their shared experiences and indicates she is, and goes with Gale to the hospital, leaving Sam, Tara, and the others to formulate their own plan. Mark calls and Sid updates on Gale's condition. Devastated, she replies, but everyone leaves these girls. Sid promises to return to Seattle as soon as she knows Gale is okay, but later breaks this promise when Sam calls from the warehouse where the third act begins. There, Sam is stabbed by Ethan using Charlie's knife and is ambiguously left for dead again, as she is not referenced or seen again after this point. Sid arrives at the last minute to drop the TV that killed Stu onto Ethan's head, saying, second time I've done that, if you can believe it, works every time. The ending includes Sam tossing Billy's mask into an old gutter and following Tara and Sidney into the light. And they go into the other plot points, and they kind of include there are no Easter eggs left at each crime scene. The cat and mouse bodega scene was more of like a car kind of situation. After Sam and Tara run into the bodega, they escape out the back door and flag down a taxi cab. Ghostface attacks the sisters through the back window and also stabs the cab driver. The car is T-boned by a truck, and they crash upside down in the middle of Manhattan. Another intended cameo was Dwayne Martin's Joel Jones, who doesn't seem like he would have had the biggest role in that. Unused ideas and lines from past movies were also incorporated. For example, Gale's chase scene, she says, you've been in my life so effing long. I made you and you made me. You want to try and finish this? Adding a line scripted but cut from script Scream 4. Go ahead if you've got the gut. Kevin Williamson's major unused idea from the original Scream 4 involved the killer Jill surviving. This concept was later used in his TV show The Following. Liana Liberato's character Quinn would have been shot superficially in the head, not in the center. When she comes back for one last scare, she is tased by Tara and left unconscious. As Sam is about to finish her off, Tara makes a surprising request. I want her to live. I want her to suffer, please. And that's about all you get. So super fascinating. Let me just say that, number one. Like, I really enjoy seeing these type of things. It is interesting, like, just the ideas that one might have, right? And you take a look at it and you say, okay, well, we got to change up a couple things. I mean, there's some things that are kind of even unanswered there, like what happens to Danny, right? So, like, Danny is kind of used as this red herring for sure. You know what I mean? Almost more than he was used in the actual movie. He definitely does, like, weirder or more things that, like, there's no way you could do without being the killer type thing. And maybe that's how it had to be, pulled back. I like the Scream 6 version. I like them being in a relationship. I like their relationship in Scream 6. I think I prefer that over to what I heard here. And then you have, just all of the other stuff. The bodega car thing. Like, it would have been interesting to see the car thing. I think the bodega scene was really good. I don't know how it's necessarily aged. Like, I think it's just as good now as it was then. I don't know. Like, to me, I'm always a person that's on the ladder sequence in terms of my love for it. I really love that sequence of events. The bodega to me is under that, but maybe to some it's above it. The car thing, even in the article they say it was probably too expensive. I mean, you think about a car flipping and all of this stuff. Like, yeah, they probably had to cut that out for that. I mean, that sounds cool. I mean, I would have liked to have seen that scenario be played out. And then one more thing before we get to the Sidney stuff, that Kirby part, thank God they did. I guess almost in a way, thank God Sidney wasn't in the movie, because did it make sense for Kirby to throw the TV and for it to be her? Well, I think we all speculated that would have been Sidney if she was in it, right? I mean, we assumed, like, in the shrine stuff, there would have been things that Sidney would have said versus other people. But, in a weird way, like, I'm a fan of 6. You all know this. I kind of appreciate what ended up happening. I think, if anything else, it actually gave Kirby and Hayden a chance to shine where she probably wouldn't have in this version of Scream 6, right? Because it's like, in the shrine scene, I think the Kirby thing was actually really, really cool. And maybe Kirby and Tara still would have had their conversation, but, I think the shrine part would have maybe been taken away from Sidney. Kirby being left for dead, again, I think would have infuriated. I don't know why, even in the first draft, I don't know why that's an idea you would think of, right? Because it's like, you made people, I mean, not even you, but like just the situation made people suffer since 2011, and then you would have done it again, almost as like a wink, wink, nod. No, that's not okay, So I'm very thankful that didn't end up happening. Again, does it make sense for Kirby to be the one to do it? I like her line delivery after it, but I think, to me, it was just cool that you got to see some sort of conclusion with her. She's okay. She didn't die. And she played a pretty freaking big part in that Scream 6, third act. Almost too big, to the point where, trying to make her out to be a killer wasn't really a good idea. But the rest of it, her impact on it, I actually thought was extremely good. And I'm really happy for it. And so, yeah, maybe leave it alone. And at the same time, that script does say Sidney would have come in just to push the TV down. And okay, that brings us to the Sidney thing, right? Look, would I have liked to have seen Sidney in all of these scenes? I suppose so. But there's a couple things that are just kind of alarming to me, right? So the way she gets into it is she just like flat out goes. I feel like, okay, that is probably textbook definition of, we just want the character involved, so we're going to write her in and have her be involved. You know what I mean? And look, like, if you want to see Sidney, you want to see Sidney. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I feel like, and this is something we've talked about so many times, you got to give a reason. Like, it's got to feel good. Otherwise, you are literally just having these characters come into these things just to do it, just because you wrote it down. And that's not really okay, especially for kind of a lore-heavy franchise that is Scream. So that part, I feel like, is a pretty big weakness where, does it make sense in a way how she rationalizes it, where, like, okay, well, if a ghost face appears anywhere in the world, eventually it's going to come back to me. Very selfish way of thinking about it, although I can understand, Sidney's perspective there. So in a way, I get it, but it's like, but they're in New York, and you're pretty far away, and it's like, well, maybe they won't. I mean, I guess technically, maybe the plan would eventually be to get everybody else, and in fact, they kind of of said that, at the end of the movie. So maybe that was the hint there, where it's like, yeah, eventually they're gonna come after Sidney, but maybe like have some faith in Sam and Tara. You know what I mean? I think it takes a serious attack to get Sidney out of hiding. Like that would be the entire point, right? And that's something you got to be careful of for Scream 7. Like, you can't just have her jump in just because she feels like it. It's got to almost be a force. She's got to be forced, which they did that in Scream 5. It was a forced situation, in a good way, not the way they did it here. So I'm not really a fan of that, although I am a fan of like the family dynamic, like having Mark in it. I think would have been really cool. The kids, so okay, we get the ages. So, you don't have to do that big of a time jump. I mean, if you do 5 years, which by the time the movie comes out, it'll be 2 years after Scream 6. So you're only technically jumping 3 more years into the future. That's not that bad. I feel like that needs to be what you do if you're going to do it, because the kids would be, I would say, a pretty good range, at that point. All right, good. So that part I'm actually quite fine with. And then you have, Sidney taking Gail's speech to Sam. It's tough because, like, Sam to Gail and Sam to Sidney didn't have too much of a different type of relationship in 5, right? Like, I feel like she almost views them generally as the same. She's told Sidney's like the main character, right? And, like we've heard Melissa talk about Sidney and Melissa talk about Nev, but in terms of the character Sam, I feel like they're kind of on equal. Maybe she likes Sidney a little bit more because Gail is just Gail. But, to have, I guess what I'm trying to like circle the wagon on, I liked the conversation between Gail and Sam. I think it actually added a little bit of intrigue where it's like, ooh, what's going on with Gail's, like, her lineage, like what's happening there. And it's really the first time we ever, not really, I wouldn't call it exploration. We didn't really explore it, but you get just this little tidbit. Sidney, does it make more sense for it to be Sidney? It probably does, right? Final girl and final girl. There's something that kind of matches up there. And then, but it seems like you definitely have her just kind of coming in and out, right? Like her doing the shrine thing. I mentioned taking it away potentially from Kirby. How about taking it away from Tara? See, I actually really don't like that, and I'm thankful, for the change. Because one, like, symbolic thing I think that we saw throughout all of Scream 6 is that Tara is the one that can pull Sam out of it. And whether that was intended or I'm supposed to read it like that, I mean, that's literally what they showed, right? Every time Sam kind of got into her trance, it would always be Tara that would, just say something and she would kind of snap out of it. In this one, it really seemed like it would be Sidney that snaps her out of it. Now, you can talk about the connection to the past and Billy's connection to Sidney, Billy's connection to Sam. So you can understand, I guess, from that point. But I like the sisterhood type thing. I like the idea that Tara is the one that can kind of help Sam and vice versa. And I think that made Scream 6 overall better. And then beyond that, I think the Gale thing makes sense. I think we all envision, like, if Sidney was in the movie, Sidney would be the one or one of the ones that would go to the apartment to be with her. And when she's taken out or whatever on an ambulance, Sidney would go with. I think we all kind of assumed that. And, a lot of people didn't like how that's how they kind of left Gale, right? So you wouldn't really want them to leave Sidney in the same way. And then you bring her back to drop the TV. Not exactly okay, like, again, there's a pro and con. Pro is, I think, the line to connect the TV and Sidney, I think that makes sense. So I think, again, it probably should have been her that dropped it, on a head. But at the same time, I don't know, like, everything happens. Everybody's got the same, say positions that are going on, and then Sidney comes in just to drop a TV. I don't know. I don't think it would have went over well. I guess that's really what this entire video is kind of speculating on. We don't know that for sure, and ultimately, like, this is the first draft when they thought they could get her. Then they thought, obviously, they couldn't get her. So, if they could get her and this thing went under more rewrites and whatnot, could it have been better? Yes, it could have. But, where we're left with now is a pretty, I would say, weak version, or weak motives or motivation, literally motivation of why certain things are happening. Kind of weak. And, again, maybe that gets ironed out as it gets closer to filming the multiverse Scream 6 that we would have gotten. You know what I mean? But, again, I really find it interesting. Like, I really like talking about this stuff. We looked at the Scream 5, original kind of draft back years ago. And I think Scream 5 had more cool things and like alternate rewrites of how they killed Vince and how they killed Wes and things. I think that one had some really cool ones that I really want to see all of them. Would I want to see the car bodega thing? Yeah. There's a couple things I would have liked. Again, like in a multiverse, if I can just like peek in and watch a couple scenes. There's a couple for this I would have liked, but I think there was more for Scream 5. I actually feel like the script did get better with Scream 6. And while I like 5, and I've liked 5 more and more each time I've watched it, I think the original, whatever we read a few years ago, that sounded like a pretty cool thing that I would have liked them to. In a multiverse, I would have liked to watch that, okay? So you let me know what you think about all this in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.